Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Muller speaking, and today I am going to talk about Louis the Great, son of Charles Robert, the king I talked about last time. And so he is the king in mostly roughly in the second half of the 14th century in Hungary. You can see the dates of his reign. So from the death of his father, Charles I, he reigned from 1342 until 1382, roughly 40 years as King of Hungary, one of the longest reigning monarchs in Hungarian history. And you can also immediately see that he was nicknamed or called the Night King. We will see why that is so. Now, in the beginning of the presentation, I would like to just pose a few questions for you to think about. And I will also give you some options, some answer options, and just try to think what you may choose as an answer. So first one is, why is Louis the only king in Hungarian history called the Great? What do you think? Was he a successful military leader? Maybe he was taller than the average soldiers, or because he wrote many books. So was he an important writer of different books? Okay, so trying to guess. And at the end, I will tell you what the background or the solution might be. Second question, what do you think? Why was he called the Night King? Maybe he did not sleep a lot. Maybe he actively took part in battles, or maybe he established a chivalric order or several different chivalric orders. So try to guess what you think might be the answer to that. Also, third question, according to tradition, in this period, 3 seas washed the shores of Hungary. Now, if you have a look at the map, or if you rely on your knowledge of history, is this statement true? Is this tradition true or false? Yes, no, maybe? What might be the answer? Try to decide for yourself. And the next question is, where is the oldest university in Hungary? By oldest, we mean that it is in operation for the longer time. So these are all cities that have universities today in Hungary. So is the oldest university in Pécs, Szeged, Budapest, or Debrecen? Of course, the pictures might give you some hints, but they could equally be misleading. Now, so you can have a look at the Kingdom of Hungary in the map in the middle of the 14th century, and you can see some of the campaigns, the military campaigns of both father of Louis, that is Charles I, and Louis I as well. And if you have a look at some of these campaigns, they go quite far. So for example, here, you can see several campaigns led by Louis, and also you can, of course, see some by Charles I here, or here. You may remember that this was a unsuccessful battle in Wallachia, but there are a lot more by Louis I, and also you can see some actions here, and also towards Poland. We will see why that is so, and why Louis decided to go that far. Okay, now talking about the campaigns, of course, he was called the Night King, which means he actively took part in most of his military campaigns. That is not unusual of kings in the Middle Ages. Their most important task would be to lead the soldiers in battle. But Louis was a little bit different, because he was not just directing his troops, but he basically fought alongside with his soldiers. So much so that quite often he got wounded in the middle of the battle. At one point, he was shot by an arrow. In a different battle, he fell off from a ladder when he was climbing up into a castle. So he was really in the midst of the battle very often. And also he enjoyed chivalric tournaments. So he really lived as if he was a knight or one of his soldiers. Now, his first major campaigns were in Italy, where he had family relationships. He had his brother Andrew, who got married to Joanna, and so became co-ruler in the kingdom of Naples. But due to certain conspiracies, he was killed. So basically, this campaign was a revenge campaign because he wanted to find out who killed his brother and why, and also he wanted to strengthen the family's grip on power in the region. So this meant several campaigns because it wasn't easy to conquer the area, but Louis managed. But the problem was that this was far away, and the local population and the local leadership didn't really like him. And so, after a few years, he had to give up his claim on this area. Also, one very important thing that was going on at the time was the plague. The campaign basically was during the time when the plague was raging in Italy in 1348, and so the Hungarian soldiers took the disease into Hungary. And of course, a lot of people died because of that. There was only uh, one reason why the Hungarian population wasn't struck by the plague that much is because Western Europe and Italy especially was a lot more densely populated. They had huge cities where people were packed together, and so the disease spread very quickly, whereas in Hungary at the time, cities weren't that developed. There weren't that many people living in cities, so basically Hungarian population in the countryside, the majority survived the disease, but of course there were quite a number of casualties. So if we have a look at the map again, you can see the Italian campaigns, which were for a few years successful, but then the area was lost from the side of Louis. So Kingdom of Naples down here, and Croatia. Later on, he led several campaigns into Croatia, which was an area that was conquered previously by kings from the Arpad period, but there was constant rivalry with Venice, with the Republic of Venice, which wanted the islands and the different harbors in this area because they were important bases for their trading activity in the Mediterranean. So there was a clash between Venice and Hungary, and mostly Louis could get out as winner from these. So basically, Dalmatian coastline and Croatia remained part of Hungary. So Hungarian supremacy and presence continued to grow in this area. Now, Wallachia is here, where Louis also had several battles, and at the end, basically, he managed to make these two states, the state of Wallachia, or the Principality of Wallachia and the Principality of Moldavia, as his vassal states, which means they did not become part of Hungary. They were mostly not populated by Hungarian people, but the two states pledged alliance and were vassal states. That means were friendly and they tried to follow the orders of Louis, but these areas were never really attached to the Hungarian kingdom. And also there's the Polish kingdom. If you remember the agreement in Visegrad in 1335, the three kings, the Czech king, the Polish king, and the Hungarian king, made basically all sorts of economic agreements. And later on, a few years later, the Polish king and the Hungarian king even made an alliance, meaning that if the Polish king dies without a male heir, then the Hungarian king can inherit the throne of the Polish kingdom, which actually happened in 1370. Casimir, the king of the Polish, died without a male heir, and that meant that Louis, based on this treaty several years before that, he could inherit the throne. Now, the Polish nobility was not really happy about that. because for them, Louis was a foreigner, but they agreed that he could become the king of Poland. This meant a personal union between the two countries. This doesn't mean that the two countries became one country. They were separate two independent countries with the same king. So basically, one king ruling over two different kingdoms. Now, this is not an easy task. Um, Given the differences, the language difference, Louis didn't really speak any Slavic languages. So very often he would not be even in Poland, but he would leave affairs to his mother, who would know the area more. And that again was something that the Polish nobility and leadership didn't really like. So after a while, there was a bit of a tension because of this. So Poland did not become part of Hungary, is just the person of the king that unites for a relatively short period the two countries. And this sort of union between Hungary and Poland gave rise to, especially in the 19th century, gave rise to a sort of a misconception. Even Petőfi wrote a poem about this. That there was a time when Hungary was great, and three seas were on the shores of Hungary. And that is a common misconception in history, because if you have a look at the map, the Adriatic Sea down here, yes, all right, the Croatian area was conquered by the Hungarians. That could be said as something that was attached to Hungary. But if you have a look at the Black Sea, here you have Wallachia and Moldavia, which were not part of the Hungarian kingdom. They were just vassal states, friendly states for some time. And on other occasions, they were quite not very unfriendly. So that means that we cannot say that the Black Sea was a Hungarian sea. And in the north, because most people just thinking about Poland today, of course, Poland reaches the Baltic Sea today. So if you think about Hungary and Poland united, we would think that it is natural that the Baltic Sea becomes sort of a Hungarian sea. But again, that's not true, because if you have a look at the map, you can see the Teutonic Knights having a huge area, and later on what becomes Prussia. And so basically the Polish kingdom at the time was nowhere near the Baltic Sea. So unfortunately, this is not the case. So Hungary having three different seas, that's sort of a legend that we cannot say that it is true. Now, turning from the many wars that Louis fought towards internal policies, this is a relatively stable period in Hungarian history, and Louis also tried to pass laws and organize things inside the country to make everything function quite well. Of course, the nobility is a very important layer of society. The nobility always wants to have their privileges first written down in the Golden Bull. So basically, Louis reissued the Golden Bull with a few changes, but basically how we know the text of the Golden Bull, of the what we think is the original text of the Golden Bull, the oldest text comes from 1351. So basically, when we are reading the source, the Golden Bull, we are reading the text not from 1222, but from 1351, because this is the oldest surviving copy of the Golden Bull, because Louis reissued this text. The changes that he made in the basic privileges of the nobility, one thing is that he did not differentiate. That means that even from lesser nobility to the upper nobility, the barons, everybody had the same and equal privileges. That's also an important step. And also he introduced something that is called the avicitas, or entailment in English. In Hungarian, this is called ősiség, which means, as usual, we are in the Middle Ages, land ownership is the most important thing. It is the source of all wealth and all power. And how land can be inherited and bequeathed, this was a bit of a change. According to this law, only the son could inherit the land. If there is no son, then the land would go back to the king, which was, of course, relatively good for the king, because in that case, he could grant the land to somebody else as sort of a reward. The difference being that in the original Golden Bull, the nobleman could decide who would inherit the land. It could even be a daughter. A quarter of the land could go to the daughter as well, or a distant relative. So that gave more freedom to the nobleman. From that time on, it was only the father to the son, so only the son could inherit the land. Now, some important offices, he also reformed some of the internal structure of government, but I just listed some of the most important offices here. Some of them were there before the time of Louis, but long after him as well. So these are relatively characteristic positions throughout the Middle Ages and even later on. So from the time of Saint Stephen, we have the position of the Palatine, a person who is the deputy to the king, so probably the most important position after the king. And basically, we even have palatines in the 19th century, so as long as we have this medieval structure. The voivode is the leader of Transylvania, which was governed by the voivode, who was more or less in charge of that area, but of course was a person appointed by the king. Other regions like Croatia were governed by a ban, and you could also see some other areas, especially in the southern regions, that were governed by different bans appointed by the king. Now, we also have Chief Justice, because the king, especially when the king is on different military campaigns, cannot deal with all sorts of legal cases. So a Chief Justice is in charge of that. Also, of course, the Master of the Treasury is an important position, and each and every county has a bailiff. So some of these positions were there from the time of Saint Stephen, and also we have these positions throughout the period. Now, how about the majority of the society, the peasants, the serfs? Of course, they carry on their agricultural activities, but especially because of the plague, there's a bit of a shortage of workforce. So very often noblemen who do not have enough serfs but have plenty of land, they would try to attract the workforce from other parts of the country. And of course, if the serfs decide to go to a different landlord, they can do so. There is freedom of movement for the serfs, but that means then where they come from, the place they decide to leave, then there would be a workforce shortage in that area as well. So Louis understood that there is a problem because of this, because of the shortage of workforce. So he decided that the feudal dues, the tax that the serfs have to pay to their landlords, should be the same everywhere. So, for example, a landlord cannot attract peasants from other regions by saying that, okay, you don't have to pay that much tax, because then the other landlord would lose workforce. So that none of the nobles could collect more tax, okay, because also that would mean exploitation. Maybe the serfs cannot go away, but they suffer from very high taxation because a landlord says, okay, I need more income, so I would collect 2 times more this year. So nobody can do that. Because, of course, the serfs would go away in that case, maybe. And they cannot collect less tax to attract the serfs from other regions. So this became called the ninth, which means that it's tax in kind, which means the products, so the food that the serfs produced. Already we have the tithe, which is 1/10 of the crops that goes to the church. And there is 1/10, which is the 9th tenth, that goes to the landlord. So basically 10% to the church and 10% of the crops that they harvested goes to the landlord. And of course, they still have to pay the gate tax and other forms of taxation present in the Middle Ages to the king and to local landlords. Now, as for cultural development, we have to mention the first ever university in Hungary, which was established by Louis the Great in 1367. It was established in Pécs, and very often, as we have a university today in Pécs, today's university would refer back to 1367 as their date of establishment. Unfortunately, the two universities are not the same, because this university was a very short-lived one. It existed only for a couple of years and then it discontinued, so it stopped functioning. And the university that we have in Pécs today was basically a university that moved there after the First World War from Pozsony, because we had Hungarian University in Pozsony from the 19th century, but due to the border changes after the First World War, it decided to move to another city, into a city that remained part of Hungary. So the University of Pécs today is not the same, was only established in the 19th century. So between the 14th century and the 19th century, there was no functioning university in Pécs. The university only moves there after the First World War. Now, we also have to mention a bit of history writing. The Illuminated Chronicle. Illumination means illustrations. Okay, you can see on the left-hand side some of the nice illustrations from the Illuminated Chronicle. This is one of the first pages where you have Louis sitting on his throne. This is a very, very nice codex, which basically tells the story of the Hungarian people from the time of the migration up until the reign of Louis I. And so it is a very important historic source, but some of the content, of course, goes back hundreds of years before the time it was written. And at the time, history writers relied a lot on legends and traditions, so they didn't really go out into finding documents and so on. So there would be a lot of legendary content in the Illuminated Chronicle, but still it is a very important source of Hungarian history. Now, one piece of art that we have to highlight from this period is a famous sculpture, Saint George slaying the dragon, coming from the legendary Saint George. And you can see the small statue in the picture. The statue is today in Prague. It was created in the 14th century, and it's still the same statue that makes it the oldest full-figure bronze statue in Europe. And that was created by two brothers who are often just called the Kolozsvári brothers because of their family name. And so, yeah, and that is in Prague. But that originally comes from Hungary. Now, of course, in medieval times, castles were very important, not just for protection against enemies, but also as places for living. Louis the Great built the castle in Diósgyőr. Here you can see pictures from a couple of years before, when it was still in ruins, because for a very long time it wasn't really renovated. And also there was a big debate whether it should be renovated or not, because it is basically a historic castle ruin. But then a few years ago, a decision came that people would enjoy seeing what it actually looked like in previous times. So they decided to reconstruct it. So let me just show you a video, not this one, about what it looks like today. A lot of you might have been there before, but this is actually how it looks like today. And it's quite nicely renovated. Not all of it, because there should be a roof as well, because it really had tiled roofs as well. But most of the internal and outside layout is very nicely redone. Okay, and just maybe another video about what it used to look like and what it looks like now. So now this is what it looks like. So you can see nicely renovated parts of the wall, and all of the towers look the same. And this is what it looked some years ago. So there has been a really nice reconstruction. And if you go inside, it actually looks as it probably looked like in the 14th century, in the time of Louis the Great. So there would be you can walk around inside, and there's also the biggest hall, meeting hall and dining hall from medieval times inside this castle. So it is very nicely redone. Maybe I just yeah, here you have some internal videos as well. So it is really worthwhile to go and have a look, and you can have a feeling of what it might have been like to be living in a medieval castle. It was, of course, quite cold inside, even though there was a very smart heating system, and even there was a bit of running water, contraries to what we would imagine medieval knights and kings would live like. Okay, so the castle of Diósgyőr, of course, near Miskolc. So now the question of inheritance is problematic as usual, because Louis had only daughters. So, and that is a problem because most of the nobility would want a king and not a queen. But nevertheless, Maria and her husband Sigismund of Luxembourg inherited the throne, but after the death of Louis, it was a bit of a struggle for whether Maria could be accepted as king, queen, or monarch, or Sigismund should be crowned. A couple of years later, Sigismund became the actual king of Hungary. Now, how can we assess this period? The campaigns cost a lot of money at the time. There were these huge campaigns into all sorts of regions, but some of them were actually necessary because of the threat from Venice, because also a country called the Ottoman Turks, the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, appeared in this period. And by the time the middle of the reign of Louis, he had to fight some of the Turkish troops which were already in the Balkans, and the next kings had to face the threat of the Turkish invasion coming from the Balkans later on, the Hunyadis as well. One of their biggest problem was the Ottoman expansion. But other campaigns were just costly adventures. But as Hungary had a stable financial background, 14th century is really the time when Hungary was very prosperous. The gold mines and the silver mines produced more gold and silver than any country in Europe at the time. So really there was enough money to cover all these expenses. And also there was internal stability, so the country was relatively safe from the troubles of the beginning of the 14th century. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions. Why is Louis the only king called the Great in Hungarian history? It's enough to have a look at the map. He was a successful military leader, and also because he made Hungary conquer different areas, or maybe with personal union. So he ruled over probably the biggest empire among Hungarian kings. Why was he called a Night King, as I mentioned? So it's B. He actively took part in the battles and got wounded, and he was really fond of the lifestyle of knights and the chivalric values and chivalric way of living. Okay, so three seas washing the shores of Hungary. No, that was not true, for the reasons I mentioned before. And again, it's enough to have a look at the map to see that this tradition is not quite true, not historically accurate. So where is the oldest university in Hungary? A lot of you would say, well, Pécs, because 1367, this is where Louis established a university, but that university ended quite soon. So for about more than 500 years, there is no university whatsoever functioning in Pécs. Szeged has a similar story with a university moving there after the First World War. And basically the oldest university is in Budapest. Again, this is not a university that was established there, but a university established in the 17th century moved there, and ELTE is basically that university functioning for more than 300 years now, almost 400 years. Okay, so that's it for about Louis the Great. And so I'll, oh yeah, and just a short video about the battles, how the, okay, how the, how some of these battles might have looked like. And okay, let me just show you, this is about the Italian campaigns. So just to have a feeling of what the battles and the period might have looked like. So here you can see the militaries moving towards Naples, and basically Naples was sieged successfully by about a military of more than 10,000 knights and bowmen and crossbowmen. And so King Louis was actively fighting in these battles. So here you can just see a more or less image of what knights look like at the period. So this is it from today. And if you're interested in the videos, you can see the links below the videos I used today. So that's it from Mr. Mulos today. Goodbye, take care, and see you next time.